welcome to another episode of The Hump with Katie. I'm your host, Katie Thiroux, and I'm excited to bring you today's episode with one of the most creative bassists and composers out there today, Chris Lightcap. If you're new to The Hump, this is a series where I interview some of the world's most talented artists and musicians and find out why are they so amazing, how did it all happen, and ultimately what can we learn from their journey. Before I bring you today's amazing episode, I'd love to thank our sponsors, and first up we have the clothing company Jams World. You guys, I absolutely love Jams World. I'm wearing a Jams World right now, of course, and the reason why I love it is because the fabric is made from 100% spun crushed rayon, and it keeps me cool and comfortable. They've been making clothing in Honolulu, Hawaii since 1964, and the artwork is so unique. It's screen printed right onto the fabric, and it looks like a piece of art. Go to jamsworld.com and use the promo code JAZZ15, and you'll get 15% off your entire online purchase. Next up, I'd like to thank Colstein's String Shop. I absolutely love Colstein's. They are doing amazing things for the bass community. They have 2 amazing locations in Long Island, New York, and a killer online store. Go to colstein.com and use the promo code KD10 and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. All right, the time has come to bring you today's episode with the amazing bassist and composer and just really nice person, Chris Lightcap. I love it when people write comments and send me emails saying that they listened to the episode, they checked it out, and they learned something. That's why I do this. I appreciate all the comments and feedback I get. I do it for you all. I really appreciate you all listening and checking out. And one of those emails was from Chris Lightcap saying, he'd listened to a few episodes, and I was like, oh my gosh, you have to be on the show. So that's how this came to be. Chris has a really unique path to his musical career. He didn't start playing upright until he was in his last year of high school, and even at that point was kind of piecing together some classical, some jazz, all throughout college. But just the opportunities he got led to be where he is today, and that's what I was really trying to figure out, because he's such an amazing composer and bassist, creative bassist, and the tone and the groove that he has. Can't say enough good things. Of course, I'll leave links to his music down below. You gotta check out his group, Big Mouth and Superette, and then he's combined them to be Super Big Mouth, I think it's called. It's amazing. It's like a nice blend of jazz, West African, surfer, rock, psychedelic. So definitely go check that out. All right, without further ado, here is Chris Lightcap. Hey, it's so great to meet you.
You too.
I was just with a previous person who was on the Hump. He's a bass player composer, David Schwartz, and someone was asking like, "Oh, how'd you get on the Hump?" He was like, "Oh, I just, wrote that I liked an episode, and then you asked me to be on," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's sometimes how it goes."
Yeah, it's amazing how that works.
Yeah, it's the bass community. Hey, so cool. Hey, were you parking in New York City?
Oh yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah.
It's really exciting when you can actually find a spot where you don't have to move it later. That's kind of like,
oh yeah,
a major event. I'm always tempted to call my mom and tell her.
Yeah. There's that old Henny Youngman joke. He and his wife are like in New York City and they find a spot and she's like, quick. He's like, quick, honey, stand in the spot. I'm going to go buy a car. Yeah, it's monumental. Yeah.
He was a treasure.
Yeah, for sure. I love. I know he was so weird. He had like this one bit because of course he played violin,
right? And
it sounded terrible comically. But he had this whole show where like he would do his one-liners and then he would talk about barbecue all the time, like how to do a proper barbecue, and then he'd do his weird violin thing and.
My wife, please. That's all.
Yeah.
My Henny Youngman. I'm not up on him as much as I should be. I like a lot of comedians, but he's not one that I've checked out enough of.
His old school. It's that's like old.
Borscht Belt stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, cool. Thanks for taking the time. I know it was last minute, so I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was just listening to a lot of your music just now. It's good for this time of day too, for me.
Oh well. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, I know these always work chronologically because I'm so interested in how people get started and what their initial inspirations are. So you grew up in Pennsylvania, which is like,
yes,
that's like bass central.
Well, depending on where you're.
Maybe not where you grew up, but I mean,
if I'd grown up just 1 hour west of where I grew up, then I would have been surrounded by amazing bass all the time.
Your life would have been extremely different.
Well, I probably would have heard a lot of jazz growing up, which I didn't hear any growing up where I was. But there's a pretty big chasm between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. That's the the Pennsylvania part of Pennsylvania. And I sort of grew up on the western part of that, like the very far western edge of it. So I didn't hear a lot of. I mean, I didn't really know what the bass was till I was older. I mean, till I was at least, I wasn't conscious of the bass till I was, 12 or 13, even why it was ever part of music or anything like that. But in terms of jazz, I mean, it was not even on my radar till I was much older than probably someone who had grown up in definitely Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But Pittsburgh as well. Pittsburgh is a city with an amazing jazz tradition, as you're aware.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the jazz musicians from Pittsburgh who went on to make names for themselves split kind of early on. Whereas in Philly, I think there was more of a community that kept happening and thriving there. Like Art Blakey left very young, and when people would ask him about Pittsburgh, he didn't really have anything good to say about it. Is my understanding. I mean, I actually remember reading his interview in Art Taylor's book Notes and Tones, where he's like, I don't want to talk about Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Because he was like, I think he worked in a coal mine from when he was a little kid. And, of course, Ray Brown.
Yeah.
But we could talk about that all day. But.
Of course. But so what, you of course didn't start on the bass. Well, not of course, I know that. So what was your first instrument?
My first instrument was piano when I was 7 or 8. My mom played piano. She was a pretty serious amateur classical pianist, and my sister played piano. And she asked me if I wanted to try piano when I was, I think, in 2nd or 3rd grade. And I said, okay. And it didn't really take.
Yeah.
Which, I have regrets about now that I was just a kid, but I have regrets about not having more piano skills early on, not having that kind of foundation. Being given this great opportunity to take lessons with somebody. I just didn't want to practice, wasn't interested. And then, in fact, I remember I have vivid memories of my mom trying to get me to practice and sitting down with me at one point. I mean, I had a teacher, a really nice teacher, and she was trying to get me to practice. And I remember at one point her just saying, I think she said her words were, "This is fruitless."
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, I could, like, she was right though. I mean, she wasn't getting anywhere. I was just being very stubborn. So anyway, I think when I was going into 4th grade, my school decided to start an orchestra program. It wasn't really an orchestra. It was like a band with violins. So you could choose either violin or a band instrument. And my mom presented it to me this way. She said, "Do you want to start to play violin?"
Yeah.
She didn't ask
any
of the other instruments.
Yeah, no one wants that.
Because both of my parents were huge classical music, like, fanatics. They went to the Pittsburgh Symphony. They took us to the Pittsburgh Symphony a lot, which was amazing. I didn't appreciate it enough at the time, but I mean, I was hearing people like Itzhak Perlman, and I mean, the conductor was Andre Previn, and then Warren Mazel. I mean, it was incredible what was going on there, and the fact that we were getting to go hear them play. And so I think that was a big part of why she presented it that way. And I said, okay. And I was into it enough that it kind of got me started, and I was at least interested enough in the beginning that I was practicing regularly, and it didn't go the same way that piano did at first. But after a couple of years of that, that's when I was in 4th grade. I was really starting to figure out what kind of music I liked, and it definitely was not classical music at the time.
Yeah.
It was, what all my friends were listening to, The Police, and I liked a lot of older stuff too. Like I was really obsessed with The Who, and then Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. And by the time I was in 7th, 8th grade, I really did not want to play violin anymore.
Yeah.
And my mom was, I mean, I could have just flat out refused to play it. And I don't know, I never pushed to that point, but it was just, they would just bribing and threatening me to practice, and you know exactly what you kind of want in a
Yeah. That's what you want in an aspiring musician. Yeah.
threaten your kids. But I mean, they were definitely. I mean, I understood, and as a parent now, I understand their frustration and know where they were coming from.
I know you just want to go like,
I had
this is going to be so good for you, like, right?
Right, yeah. My teacher in school took them aside and was like, you know, you might have a little genius on your hands, which was total BS.
Yeah.
But I showed some talent, and he wanted me to keep playing. So I think that really stuck with him. Like, you can't quit.
Oh yeah.
You know, just because I could I had an ear and I could find the tune and not just sound completely horrible.
That's interesting, though, not to cut you off, that you enjoyed, I'm going to say you enjoyed violin more than piano at that age, because to me, I'm the same thing with piano. It's like I can play, but I, wish it was a little bit better. But that's at least instant gratification because you don't have to tune.
Right.
And so as a kid, I started on violin, and it was terrible, like just awful, because, it sounds all bad.
Right.
But that's interesting. You gravitated towards the string instrument.
Well, I remember, I think a big part of the piano is that I just heard so much piano growing up, and my sister did piano, and I was a contrarian very much at that age. I mean, I'd like to think I'm not so much of one now, but especially when anything involving my sister, who's like the nicest person, but growing up with sibling rivalry, I think that was subconsciously part of it. I didn't want to do what she was doing. And I definitely had a thing for string instruments. I don't know what it was. I remember also my mom, before I played violin, I found my mom's old ukulele at my grandma's house, and I used to play around on that a lot. Which I remember seeing an interview with Dave Holland. He said the same thing.
Oh, wow.
But ukulele for that generation was kind of a thing, I think. It was like, my mom said she used to play along with, there was this show called the Arthur Godfrey Show, where he would teach you how to play on this television show. They teach you how to play ukulele, and you could it was the thing. Everyone wanted to play ukulele. It was like very popular. So anyway,
it's back. It's totally back. It's in vogue.
I know the uke craze. Is it still a thing?
It is. I mean, and then bass players are getting into like bass uke, and it's nutty. Yeah.
Well, I know about the U bass thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of I've seen a lot of those, but they sound really good. But anyway, I do think there was something about the violin that was appealing to me at that age. But the more I became my own person, and the more I got in my own listening habits, the further alienated I got from the violin. And I tried to kind of find ways to be into it. Like, I remember trying to figure out like some guitar parts on records and play them on violin, but just never really did it for me. So when I was when I was 14, I started high school, and I reconnected with some old friends from elementary school that I hadn't seen in like 7 years, and one of them played guitar, electric guitar, and there's another guy I met that year who played drums, and they both were like, well, we want to start a band, and if you played bass, you could be in the band. And I was already thinking that I wanted to play bass anyway, so there was something that was drawing me to the bass, because I was starting to pay attention to it on records, mostly because I was a Who fan.
Yeah.
And the bass playing in the Who, I didn't realize it was so not normal.
Yeah.
Like, I thought, but I think because of John Entwistle, the bass was a very interesting instrument to me, and also starting to get into Yes, and I was like, oh, the bass playing. So I thought, well, I want to play bass anyway. So they said, great, if you get a bass, well, then we'll start playing in my parents' basement and have that whole thing happen. And so my cousin Steven was a keyboardist, but also played some bass. He lived in Philadelphia, and I called him up. I said, are you still using that bass? And he said, no, you can totally borrow it. And he said, we're coming to Latrobe, which is my hometown, for Thanksgiving. I'll bring it to Graham's house, our grandma's house. And so he brought it, and it was a nice 70s Fender Precision.
Mm-hmm.
And like this crappy little Roland guitar amp.
Yeah.
And he was like, look, this is not a real bass amp, but this will get you started. You can, so that was really nice of him, obviously. And I remember that night coming home from Thanksgiving and immediately just running up to my room, plugging it in, getting, I had a little boom box with all my tapes that I listened to, and putting on, I think it was Eric Clapton.
Yeah.
And immediately just starting to play along and just be like, oh,
you found it.
This is the shit. I mean,
yeah.
In fact, I remember I had just gotten sort of my first girlfriend at the time. I was about 14. I called her up immediately and was like, my cousin just gave me a bass guitar to borrow, and I'm like playing along. And I remember her reaction being like, wow, you seem really happy right now.
Yeah. That's probably happened to multiple people.
Right. Yeah. So that was, and so then it was that thing, that proverbial thing that happens that once you find your instrument and your sort of medium, whatever you want to call it, then that just became my obsession, and I wanted to do it all the time. And then my parents went from, they still wanted me to, I was still playing violin. I was playing it like in a youth symphony, and they still had to force me to practice, but they couldn't get me to stop practicing bass, guitar.
Yeah.
And I remember like even saying to them, I think I want to play bass guitar, and them going from being so into me playing violin, renting me and then buying me an instrument, and then with the bass being like, okay, so figure out how you're going to play bass then.
Now it's on you. It's on you now.
Yeah. And I think that was a combination of them just not really caring whether I played in a rock band or not, and not having any opinion about it. And also just me being of an age where they thought I should figure that out. And so I was just playing in this band. I mean, obviously we were horrible. It was just beyond horror. I literally had the bass for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I went and was like playing in their basement, like trying to play Kinks songs with them and stuff. But I was just having so much fun though. Going from, being told what to play.
Yeah.
The whole thing, and then just getting to choose what we were going to play and having it be part of my friend group, my peer group.
It makes such a difference when the people your age, you're all into this thing.
Yeah.
And like, even though maybe, and at the time you're not like, oh, this sucks. It's like you said, like, man, we're just having fun.
I didn't realize how bad we were at all. I mean, I knew we weren't great, but I was like, oh, this is cool. This is a good start, And then I years later, I found a tape of it, and it's hilarious. I mean, it is brutal. It's like, I mean, they could play. Like the drummer was like, had been studying drums and playing in the school band and stuff. And Mike had been taking lessons from this guy at this local music store. And I had no clue. I didn't even know what the bass parts were to any of these songs. I was like doubling the guitar line half the time. I didn't have enough of a clue to like figure out what the bass notes were on the song, like what the part was. Forget not even bass line, just like, what are the notes? Like, not forget where to play them.
Yeah.
But eventually I started getting a little better, and it was all I was all totally self-taught. And I got my own bass eventually because I called my cousin Steven. I asked him if I could buy it off him, and he said, no, I'm sentimentally attached to it. So my friend Mike, the guitar player, said, well, there's a bass in the store where I take lessons. It's another Fender Precision, and they just marked it down because they can't sell it because it was really not a very nice color. It's like this really ugly cream colored bass. But my teacher says it's a really good bass. He also plays bass, and it's a really good price for what it is. So I went there, I checked it out, and I just started I put on layaway. I started mowing lawns for 6 months to buy it. And I remember the day that I went to get it. It was like the happiest moment of my life. My ugly Fender Precision.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, and I was totally just playing in bands and self-taught, and
it's just like no jazz up until this point, just kind of.
No, well, the jazz started to creep in when well, I started playing in the actual jazz band at my school, but they called it a stage band. It was
Yeah.
more like a rock band with horns.
Mm-hmm.
With, you know, I think they played the closest thing to a jazz tune they played Birdland.
Yeah.
But then also I was such a nerd and buying guitar magazines and trying to read bass player interviews and stuff like that. Eventually, through the rock music that I was playing, and eventually I started getting more into soul music, Motown, because I was just becoming aware of who James Jamerson was and things like that. And then eventually I worked my way over to Jaco and Stanley, and then worked backwards to Weather Report and Return to Forever and Miles, etc.
Yeah, and and it's such a journey back then. Like you said, it's like you're having to read the physical magazine and do all of that historical research, and it doesn't take 1 second like it does now. It kind of takes a while.
Right. You have like to say, oh, Jaco Pastorius. Oh, cool. Who's that? Well, he's this bass player.
Okay.
And he played fretless. They might tell you he played fretless bass, but I didn't. I mean, I remember seeing his picture, Jaco Pastorius, like on some bass, something, and with no explanation as to who he was. Just saw what he looked like, and then I went to the store, found his solo record, and I read there was something about Herbie Hancock. It has that blurb on the back, where he talks about him. And I was like, Herbie Hancock, the guy who did Rocket. You know, like that's basically the level of knowledge that we're dealing with here. So I was in this youth symphony though, playing violin still, and there was a bass player in the youth symphony who also played electric bass. So we became like, on the breaks we would just talk bass, mostly talk about like Geddy Lee and Chris Squire, and then he started talking then he was the one who taught me a lot about Jaco and Stanley. And I remember he had a copy of he knew that I had the first Jaco record, and I think I had Word of Mouth at that point, and then he laid Invitation on the live record, which was impossible to find in the stores back then. He had a tape of it that I think he got from his teacher. So eventually he said, look, if you really want to get serious about it, you could study with my teacher. I have a really great teacher in Greensburg, which is the next town over from Latrobe. And I said, cool. So he gave me his number, and I called him up. And this guy was a monster bass player. And so hearing him play, like watching him play close up, I mean, he was a really amazing musician. And his technique and his harmonic knowledge, and he was a serious bass player. He could have moved to New York and become really a well-known musician. But there's something about that part of the state where people just don't want to leave. They either leave really young, early, like Ray Brown did, or they just never leave. And he played gigs around town, and he was a really amazing musician. He also played upright. So that, plus my friendship with this guy from the youth orchestra. By the way, the guy in the youth orchestra with me was a guy named Joel Reist, who is the principal bassist with the Nashville Symphony now.
There you go.
He's like a seriously world-class bass player now. So, so this guy Eric Pantalone was his name. I just reconnected with him. He lives in Boston now. He was like, okay, these are the building blocks of how to learn how to play walking bass lines, and he tried, and at that point I was really into slapping. So he would try to like say, well, that's cool to do that too, because he did that as well. I mean, it was, everybody was slapped back then. It was just like what you did if you were playing electric bass. And but he said, this is, if you want to be serious about playing jazz, like he just showed me a lot of really basic theory stuff. Actually, I didn't know it all, like this is a triad, this is an interval, these are intervals, these are triads, this kind of thing. And this is how you can start to teach yourself how to play walking bass lines. And I was just starting to make a lot of progress with him. He showed me a lot of really just rudimentary technical things that completely just made me move forward light years compared to what I was just doing on my own. Stuff like, using one finger per fret. And then suddenly he called the last lesson I took with him. He said, I'm moving away. I just got the gig with the Air Force Band.
Mm.
So I was like, oh, so it's like, he's like, yeah, I'm moving. I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
So that really bummed me out because he was literally like, I was so into going to lessons with this guy and there was no one else. I said, well, is there anyone else I can study with? He's like, not really.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's like, I have no one I could recommend. And it's true. He was kind of amazing. He was just like this guy in the middle of nowhere living in his parents' house. And he was an incredible teacher. But I kept playing and I was, practicing a lot. And what he showed me was really amazing.
The kind of stuff where like you can continue to like
Right,
teach yourself.
Yeah, I literally took like 6 lessons, but it was like a really pithy 6 lessons, like just amazingly helpful and a lot to work on. And so while I was one really cool thing that happened during that time is after my junior year, and I mean, I wasn't trying to be a professional musician, but I just liked playing music. I wasn't thinking I would ever want to be a professional musician. But one of my teachers in my high school recommended I apply for this program called the Governor's School for the Arts, which they used to have in Pittsburgh. Do they have that in California? Anything like that?
No, I have a friend that did one like in Virginia. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, so it was I don't know how it was in Virginia, but the one that they had in Pennsylvania, they don't have it anymore. But they had them for all different subject areas at different places. But the one for the arts, it was a 5-week, totally paid for, free ride, basically like an intensive immersive program where you just did your art form for 5 weeks. So for me, not being at an arts high school was incredible. You know, and I was the only bass player there. And that was the summer that I decided I wanted to start trying to play upright bass. Which was, it wasn't, I didn't have an orchestra program at my school, so I had to figure out how to do it. And I called Joel, the guy from Symphony, the Nashville Symphony guy, and he said, well, my school is renting. My school has the bass. My parents bought me a bass, but my school still has the bass that I was playing before, and maybe they'd be willing to rent it to you. It was like this nice old K bass. So I called the school. They said we could rent it to you for a year for $100 for the whole year.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah.
That works. That's nice of you. And that was cool because that was really fortunate because it was a plywood bass, but it was like Joel had been playing it for years, and either he or somebody else had it set up where it's playable and I could learn on it. And then he also hooked me up with his teacher, who was this great orchestral bass player named Bob Skowronski, who like subbed in the Pittsburgh Symphony, and he lived closer to me so I could go to his house. And he was an amazingly great old school classical bass teacher and just gave me that Simandl foundation.
Yeah. And what made you like decide, okay, I want to play upright? Was it to play other styles of music or?
I was listening to more and more. Once I got past the Weather Report fusion thing and I went backwards and I'm starting to listen to actual classic Miles records, not really aware of who any of the musicians were yet, sort of knowing who Ron Carter was, and listening to my teacher play. Like at the end of every lesson, he would just kind of mess around on upright for me, just as a little gift, parting gift, and I would just get, that's the shit. I want to do that. And also I had that Stanley Clarke record, one of his first solo records called Journey to Love. And he plays both upright and electric on it. And his upright playing is just, if you've never heard anyone play upright bass hardly at all before, and you hear Stanley Clarke being like, you're like,
yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, I have to do it like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, also coming from the Jocko, like the really chopsy sort of approach, like the sort of, shredding thing that I was so impressed with at the time. It kind of was the gateway into upright playing. So it was just a matter of time before I'd work my way back and just want to play upright. And then once I started studying, but not necessarily sure if I wanted to play just jazz or classical, but kind of being aware of, well, I didn't have anyone to play with anyway.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of like on the job training happening or anything like that. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to study with a classical teacher, and at least I'll have that foundation. And so I was just starting to play upright when I did this governor's school program. And there was another great bass teacher at this governor's school program that became like a very dear friend of mine, Nadja Gale, who's a really fine classical bass player. She lives in Fargo now. And she was kind of like the opposite side of the coin from Bob as a teacher. She was like super passionate about bass, and like Bob was very much like, well, here's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is how you hold your hand. Nope, not like that. Not like
that,
not like that. Super rigorous about technique and just amazing. And where she would spend a whole lessons like showing me all this different classical bass literature that she was really into, like Bottesini and Bach suites, and just so passionate and so expressive as a bass player, really into solo stuff, whereas Bob was more of a, you know, he was just a straight up classical orchestral.
Yeah.
So but the other great thing about the governor's school was in terms of jazz, there was a great jazz teacher named George Russell, not to be confused with the
Lydian
George. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he also taught at Duquesne University, and just gave me a really, he did an ensemble class and did theory classes and improvisation classes, and I was playing every day with other musicians my age who were way better than me, playing for much longer, guys from Philly and Pittsburgh, and studying with this guy George, and while I was studying bass with Nadja and doing all sorts of other stuff. That was a wonderful program, and I owe a lot to having been able to go there. And the funny thing is, I found out later that I was the only bass player there.
Yeah.
And I found out later that I was practically a beginner on electric and a complete beginner on upright, that Christian McBride was supposed to go that year.
Oh man.
From Philly, because it's from anyone in the whole state. And if he had gone, I mean, it would have been amazing for me to get to hear, but it would have been so demoralizing.
Yeah. Well, in this way, you got so much playing opportunity.
I got to play. I mean, it would have been good to, like, if I could have gotten through that and still wanted to play, then I would have been gotten a lot better, a lot faster. I mean, because he was already just
monster. Yeah.
Classical music and jazz and electric, and but it would have been so great to meet him. But yeah, so and then my whole senior year, basically, when I wasn't doing schoolwork, I was just practicing upright. And I played in bands also. I had a couple pro gigs pro. I had a couple semi-professional, like, weekend bands that I played with some guys who are older than me.
That's the joy of also playing bass in a small town. You're going to get some gigs.
Yeah,
actually, anywhere. Have bass, you can have a gig.
And it was kind of funny because it was like I was 17 and these guys were all like 25 and living at their parents' house still, or were in college or whatever. And it was just like really middle of the road kind of bad rock, like a lot of Bob Seger and Leonard. I mean, that's not bad, but like kind of stuff that I'm not really, like, not my favorite bands necessarily. And I was always trying to push them to do something that I wanted to do more, like, let's do a Police song. No, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And I was just completely just shut down because I wasn't even like legal. I couldn't even vote.
Yeah.
Let alone drink.
Yeah.
And we were playing these bars and stuff. So that was fun. So basically my whole senior year, I was just like practicing double bass as much as I possibly could. So that's when I was like putting in, and that's when I finally quit violin. My parents were like, okay, fine, you're playing bass now.
Put your time in.
Yeah, we're not going to make you do violin anymore. And at that point I was getting pretty tall and it just looked ridiculous to play violin.
Yeah.
And it felt weird, especially having gone from not just upright, but even just when I started playing electric bass, going from that to playing violin. It was super awkward. and plus I was terrible. So
That's it. I'm not promoting people quit because they're terrible, but find what you want to do.
yeah. I mean, I was terrible because I wasn't into it, and
Yeah.
the bass, I was not that I wasn't terrible at bass, but I was passionate about it, and it made me want to keep doing it.
And so you ended up going to school to study music.
Well, kind of. I went to college not knowing that I'd want to study music necessarily, and I'd only been playing upright for a year.
Yeah.
When I was a freshman, when I enrolled in college, and I was like, well, I'm not going to stop playing, but I'll see what kind of opportunities there are. But I didn't go to a school I didn't go to conservatory.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a school with a music department where you could major in music if you wanted to, but it was not the norm, not very common. It was a very small liberal arts school, and Williams College in Massachusetts. And but I'd been studying upright, like I'd been practicing and studying pretty seriously. And when I went to the college, if I wanted to, they said you can audition for the orchestra. So they were such a small school, they didn't have a great student orchestra, but they did have an orchestra that they maintained that was sort of like a community or like a regional orchestra.
Yeah.
Where they had semi-professionals and professionals from throughout the area. Some people who played with the Albany Symphony, which was close by. Some really, really fine players, and people from all over Massachusetts. And then they would let students, if they auditioned, if they got in to play in this orchestra. And the conductor was a guy named Ron Feldman, who was a cellist with the Boston Symphony, who was trying to transition into being a conductor. And so I was going to go from having been playing bass for a year, I was going to have to go audition for this guy.
Yeah.
And I almost didn't do it. I was completely intimidated. And my teacher, Bob, who was great, but he never said anything positive or negative about my playing ever.
Yeah.
It was just very, very Midwestern, Western Pennsylvanian in his demeanor. And so I was like, I didn't know if I could play at all or not. Like what?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm going to go play for a guy who plays, world-class musician who plays with the Boston Symphony. So I'd been studying this Marcello sonata. I remember it's like sort of like the first solo piece that I was working on. And I went to him and I was just completely beyond nervous.
Yeah.
And I played this piece, and when it was over, he goes, "Very good. You have very good intonation." I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
Like literally, I'd been studying bass for a year and getting no feedback.
No feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a tiny. So then, but then the thing is, it wasn't like it wasn't like a school orchestra. It was like functioned like a professional orchestra.
Yeah.
And I went from playing in this youth symphony where we do like maybe a movement of a Beethoven symphony to doing an entire program where you do like 6 rehearsals and then have to play the program. And I was so far in over my head. They were doing like all of Beethoven 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to just learn it.
You're like, I can just do the.
I'll studied it before.
Yeah. You're like, I'll just do the second movement.
Yeah. Right. The slow one.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that first movement, and everybody knew it because I was the only student in the bass section. They all had played it a million times. So that was kind of trial by fire. But yeah, so it was another thing though where I went from I was sort of like one of the few bass players on campus, so I got to play a lot, and I got to play in a lot of bands, and I played as much jazz as I could with other students mostly, but most of what I was actually studying formally was classical music. So they had a couple great composition teachers, and that's when I started studying composition. And I mean, I was studying it. I was writing some music, but was the first thing that kind of gave me the idea that I could possibly write music, because that was one of the main things you could study there that was sort of more fully developed than other aspects of the music department.
Oh, interesting. So what about that caught your attention or excited you? Because that's what you do now. Right.
I mean, well, I don't do it full time, but it's something that I definitely do like to do. I was in a band in college with a guy who played guitar and piano, and he was a composition I mean, you didn't really choose a major inside the music major, but he was basically being a composition, focusing mainly on composition. And he was the first one who gave me the idea, you should check this out. I think you would enjoy it. And he was playing me some of the pieces that he was writing, and he also loved the composition teacher there, this guy Bob Suderberg. And he was I took theory with him, and he was a really amazingly cool guy, really not the world's greatest teacher, but incredibly fun to learn music from. Like he was more of a creative type than probably shouldn't have been teaching theory, but he taught theory in such an amazingly fun, passionate way. And he made it really kind of come alive when he would be teaching me some kind of concept that otherwise might have been kind of dry. And so I did like the whole year of classical theory with him, where you're learning like tons and tons and tons and tons of voice leading, which I was terrible at because I didn't have a lot of piano chops. But then when I switched to studying composition with him, he was basically treating it like sort of like a composition class mixed with 20th century music theory, and he was having us just write pieces using these different theoretical concepts of like polychromaticism, polytonality, and atonality, and serialism. And he just made me, up until then I had the idea that you can't write music till you know everything about theory, and you've listened to the entire history of music. And he was the one who made me realize you can, at any stage, you can just try stuff out.
Well, writing is a great way to learn all of that.
It's true. Yes, it absolutely is. That was the other thing I was is that it's a wonderful way to learn about it. So whether I was going to continue doing it or not, it was just something that was really gratifying. And he didn't, and he made it, just was able to present it in a way that wasn't intimidating.
Yeah.
You finally hear your music played back by other musicians. That was the other thing, is that our final project involved, writing a piece and having it performed. And I wrote this string trio for me and a cellist and a violist. And it wasn't a great piece, but it was so fun to, after working on it for so long, getting to perform it and hearing people play your music, and not knowing if it's ever going to sound like music, and having them make it come alive. And that just sort of like makes you want to do more of it and develop more.
Oh yeah. Did I read this correctly, that you got to do some studying with Milt Hinton or something?
Yeah. So
please talk about that.
Okay. So towards the end of my freshman year in college, my classical bass teacher, who also played some jazz and was a composer as well, he taught at Bennington, which was 20 minutes away. And he told me about this workshop that Milt taught at, called the Skidmore Jazz Institute. And he said, you're not getting to do a whole lot of jazz while you're here, and this would be a 2 or, I forget if it was just a 2-week program where you get to just play all the time. And, so I decided to do it, and Milt was the bass teacher. And he was, did you ever get a chance to meet him?
No, I didn't. I've heard only the nicest things about him.
He was a force of nature. I mean, he had just turned 80. And he had the energy, he had more energy than any of the teachers there, who were all like 10, 20 years younger than him. So, and most unbelievably generous, warm, down to earth, incredibly just fun person. And just did a lot of teaching just by playing for you, and just like absorbing things, and loved to play for people and loved to tell stories, and incredibly encouraging. He was incredibly encouraging to me, even though he probably should have been a lot more critical of my playing. But he was and one of the coolest things I got to do was while we were there, he had me and another bass player do this bass trio version of How High the Moon for the faculty, one of the faculty concerts. So he invited us up to play with him, and it was like we went through all these different styles, like a Baroque version and etc. And he still, his playing was still like ridiculously like everything.
And the sound too, right? Yeah.
And everybody wanted to get him to do the slap thing, which was cool, obviously, but it was so much deeper than that. And when I didn't realize at the time just how important he was, as like in terms of the lineage and his place in the music. He basically is one of the people who created walking bass lines as we know it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, that was a gift. Being around, getting to be, and that was the first time I was getting to really study with people like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just him. There was Don Menza was there, and Ed Shaughnessy was with his drummer, a drumming teacher, and we were getting to play in ensembles led by people like this.
Sometimes it's better that way, where it's just like you don't know too much about them, but you can feel like, oh, they're great, this is awesome, and then later, it's a nice experience.
Right. Well, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but the guy I knew the most about was Ed Shaughnessy because of the Tonight Show.
Well, yeah.
And Doc Severinsen. He was a character, but yeah, that was a wonderful program. And then the other teacher that I met when I was in college, I met a couple. I because there weren't people that I had immediate access to that I'd have to kind of seek out. When I went to, I decided to go to Wesleyan University for a semester. Because there was an exchange program between Williams and a bunch of other colleges, one of them being Wesleyan, and Braxton had just started teaching there, and I was really starting to get into his music and Ornette Coleman's music. And when I went there, I found out that Blackwell, that Braxton was on sabbatical, so I couldn't study with him, and he was the main reason I went there. Yeah. But Ed Blackwell was there, who I took his class, and I got to do some gigs with him, and that was something that I absolutely had no business getting to play with him, but I was just lucky because I was in a small town, and the other bass players, the guy who was supposed to do it wasn't available, and I got to play 2 shows with him, and then he would invite us over to his house to do sessions with him, which I still don't understand why he wanted us to do that. I guess he had a gig coming up at the Vanguard, and with Don Cherry, and he hadn't played in a long time. He was kind of ill at that point. I mean, he only had a couple of months left to live, and so he invited us over to play with him so we could help get in shape for this run he was going to do with the Vanguard with Don Cherry. So I got to play with him a lot. And when you play with someone like that, also, of course, your understanding and your level of just engagement with the music just grows in leaps and bounds, if you're even slightly open to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so he was obviously by far the best drummer. I mean, he's the best drummer almost anyone ever got to play with, let alone me. Yeah. And I remember the first class where I got to play with him, and it was like he was the thing that blew me, that I was sort of worried, like, am I going to be able to play with him? Am I going to be able to follow what he's doing? Am I going to be ready? And then I realized someone like that, they make you play better. Yeah. It's not about. Yeah. And as of course, I'm sure you've got to experience yourself, but that was the first time I got to experience that, where I was expecting, oh, well, this is going to be impossible. Because he's like on some other level that I'm not going to get. But that's not what it's about at all. It's about everyone around you sound better, and that's universal.
Yeah, that's a good thing to learn too at that age, to have that feeling. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Well, I was just gonna ask, like, so how did you, even though like you started playing bass, really formally at the end of your high school career, it seems like you smushed so much into a short amount of time, like so much music, so much study and different things. So when did you make that leap? Like, what was your first big gig that you remember, other than those experiences like with your teachers and in school? Like, how are you Chris Lightcap today? What happened?
I don't know. Well, I moved to New York right after I graduated, and it wasn't till I think after I got to study with Blackwell, and also I met some other players at Wesleyan who became some of my best friends, and we played together all the time. And I finally, when I went there, I got to have that experience of playing with people who wanted to play as much as I did. Because at Williams, it wasn't like that. It was like, you want to do a gig? Oh, okay. You're like, I have a midterm, and then maybe can we rehearse? Yeah, I don't think we can. Like no one knew any tunes, and everyone would have real books on stage, and this was just another level of seriousness on top of that, where these guys practiced all the time, and they just wanted to play all the time. We sat around listening to music all the time and listening to improvised music, and this is all we were into. Like this was and it just became. I was like, I found my people. This is my path. It just was feeling like I was on a path. And I thought, well, when I graduate, I can either go to grad school for music or get a job and play music on the side, or I can just move to New York and try to play jazz, try to be a jazz musician.
Yeah.
Try to be a musician, period. And it'll either work out or it'll be a complete disaster.
Yeah.
So but if I'm going to do it, I have to do it now. I'm not going to, for me, it didn't make sense to wait.
Yeah.
And luckily I was moving to New York at a time where you could still sort of if you were lucky enough as I was and put in the time, you could find a somewhat affordable place to live, which I was able to do. And so I'm not really answering your question, but
that's okay.
A big part of what went into that moment for me, it wasn't really a gig. It was just a process, and it was just a reorientation, I think, of my thinking, and it happened very gradually, and it wasn't conscious. But one of the things was that I met some people that I played with, and we had so much fun playing together all the time. One of whom was a piano player who I met there at Wesleyan, and then he moved to New York. And then when Blackwell passed away, we met a good friend of his named Gerard, who was one of his students and one of his best friends, who, when he died, he left him his drums. And Gerard had a place to play on East 11th Street, New York City. And while I was finishing my senior year in college, they hooked up a weekly gig at a club, and I was coming down to play with them whenever I could, like twice a month. Yeah. So I was playing gigs with these guys at a club in New York. And I think that was huge for me, getting to do that. And we were playing tunes that we wrote, and also just tunes that we liked, and it was sort of a mixed bag of standards and Ornette tunes and Don Cherry tunes and stuff that we just were interested in. It was sort of like our book of music that we were working on together as a group, as a trio. And then we eventually did a recording while I was in college. We got some spec time at a studio, did a demo recording this place, and getting to have all those sort of experiences had a pretty big impact on me, and helped lead to my decision that I was going to move to New York myself. But I didn't know anybody. Yeah. I knew these two guys. That was it. Yeah. So, and I found an apartment, and I had a little bit of money from a grant that I got when I graduated. They would give out 2 grants a year to artists, and they gave one to me and one to a visual artist that year. So, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just live off that, and then I'll establish myself in New York without knowing anybody, having any gigs at all whatsoever. And so that obviously unrealistic. Yeah. I mean, it might have worked for somebody with a different personality. Yeah. I mean, someone who was like much more into like networking and selling themselves. And I was terrible at that. I tried to go out and meet people, and sometimes I'd make a genuine musical connection with somebody at a jam session or whatever. But for every one of those times, it would feel very awkward. Yeah. And so luckily I had these guys that I played with, and and we had a place to play. And so pretty much directly or indirectly, every musician I met was through having a place to play, and somebody would invite someone and then they would invite somebody else, and then that would lead to whatever. And I was able to start, the thing for me that helped encourage me was that I was able to find work right away. And find and I'd meet someone and they'd say, oh, I have a gig, and they'd hire me. So I was at least good enough that I could play for you know, these terrible money gigs, and I was also encouraged by the fact that I was getting to do, it's not like I was loving every single gig I was doing, but I was doing enough work with people that was really enjoyable and that I was learning from, and was having, you know, it was rewarding, and that was, you know, helping my,
you paying your dues.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I had so many, I mean, because I didn't really know any tunes, and and I didn't also just, I had played with so few people, I didn't know what I was doing. And so that whole experience of getting to figure out what you need to practice based on what you're doing at gigs, I was just starting that experience. And I remember when I first moved to New York, I was trying to practice like I was still in college, working on classical music, and then I would be practicing all day, and then I would go to a gig later that night playing, you know, standards, and I couldn't play at all. Like I was just so stuck in the ruts of my habits and my patterns. And I mean, I don't know if you ever went through that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing classical, but definitely, I think everyone needs to go through that, you know, learn on the gig and then take that home, and then that's what you practice. I mean, because obviously you got it. For me, I feel if you learn technique really, really well, it doesn't really go away. I mean, you might all of a sudden be one day like, oh, I'm out of tune. Okay, let me stretch my hand back out. But that, I think some people can get really caught up in the fundamental techniques of it, and that's what all they practice. Although I could just practice scales and arpeggios all day, and that'll get me through what I want to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what I figured out, was that I needed to do scales, and long tones were still helpful, but the other stuff I had to kind of put on the back burner for a while. All the more intensive classical repertoire things. And I never really studied jazz formally with anyone, so I didn't have a lot of theory-based exercises, or I never spent a lot of time learning jazz scales, but just like major scales up and down the neck, every way you could possibly do it. Pizzicato, and with a bow as slowly as possible. The slower, the harder.
You
know, just micromanaging things. That was what was helpful for me. But it took me years to figure that out. And so for a while, I kind of had to stop practicing because I didn't know what to practice. It was more, I found out that I felt, I don't know if I sounded better, but I felt better if I would barely practice at all at a certain time in my life than if I practiced, because I still hadn't figured out how to practice.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And one of the issues I went through in college, though, was that I was practicing so much, like I was getting the technical side together through the classical thing, but I wasn't playing enough to really figure out how to play changes. And I was getting lost on tunes. And it wasn't until I hooked up with a teacher that I met through Blackwell named Cameron Brown, who I heard Blackwell play with him with Dewey Redman, who said, you just need to go play a slow blues as slow as you can and make sure you're hearing every note. And if you're not, then slow it down more. And because he was really nice. He's like, I love the spirit of your playing, but I'm just not sure that, and I knew he was right. I was like, I'm not playing the changes. And this was like before even getting into trying to play on like a more complicated tune, where I would always get lost. And then I figured out that what I really needed to do was learn the melody of the tune before I could never play a tune without knowing the melody. So once I learned the melodies of these tunes, then I could figure out. And then once I did that, then all the knowledge that I had kind of jumping around in my brain that I'd learned that I wasn't really able to fully apply, like chord functions.
Yes.
And
Yeah, because it's so abstract. Like when you ask a bass player, just play these changes, and there's no melody going on. It's like, of course you're not going to remember it. There's nothing to attach it to.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember that's what Jocko talked about in the instructional video.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the main thing that most bass players that he would meet at the time was that they didn't know the melodies of the tunes. So.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I want to see. I mean, you mentioned. Now I'm blanking. Oh, you Dewey Redman.
Oh yeah.
And I know you play with Matt Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
And you've played with so many people, like Cecil Taylor in the big band, right?
Yeah, that was right after I moved to New York. I did that.
Yeah,
that was amazing because I was a big fan of his music, and it was kind of crazy experience.
Well, it's so cool too. I could tell like everything kind of like lined up for you, like the music you liked, the musicians you got to play with, and that you were introduced to. It was all. I mean,
sometimes it did, and sometimes it was just like I was playing with. I mean, I'm lucky that I like a wide range of music and a wide range of types of jazz, which I don't think is that uncommon now. But at the time, it wasn't that common in terms of most of the musicians around my age that I would meet. Most people were into like a very specific kind of zone.
Yeah.
And I was kind of all over the place. But sometimes that had its challenges because, I would never fully. Sometimes I'd feel like I was on the periphery of all these different scenes in New York. And again, like not knowing anybody, it took me a while to figure out how to make all these things work in tandem. And sometimes the challenge would be that I'd be playing with a different band, the different book of tunes, different group of musicians every night, which was great. I loved that.
Yeah.
But it was hard because I was still trying to figure out how I wanted to play.
Yeah, it's hard to like sink your teeth into something if it's every night it's a different genre. Even if, like you're saying, it's in jazz, but it's like pretty specific.
Yeah, so getting to finally become part of regular bands that worked somewhat consistently, like Matt's band.
Yeah.
Joe Morris's group back then in the 90s. Though that was cool because I got to work as part of a group and kind of help build a repertoire and share this sort of common language within that group, which would relate to other things I was doing, but sometimes was very specific to those groups. But the thing that really helped was when I joined Regina Carter's band, because she was working. That was the first band that I joined that worked all the time.
Yeah.
Just year round, like 10 months of work in advance in my calendar. And so I was playing as part of one group very, very consistently, night after night for 3-4 week tours and stuff. So that was the first time I got to really play in one band very consistently for very long periods of time.
Yeah. And kind of learning what that's like, the repertoire of the set.
And also to get to work with such a wonderful person as a band leader.
Yeah.
Who was very just thought of herself as, and still does. I mean, I still work with her, but she thinks of herself as like a part of the band. She doesn't make you feel like she's the leader and you're in the backing group. It's a very communal experience. Like when you
were doing that much touring back then with her, were you taking your bass on the road, or were you doing bass du jour?
Yeah,
were.
I the first road gig I did first flying gig I did in New York was probably about a year after I moved there. So I started flying with my bass in '94, and that was just what everybody did.
Yeah.
And that was with those guys. That was with Dave and Gerard. We got a gig at the Nice Jazz Festival. So I didn't know. I was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so I went to David Gage and I rented a trunk for a week. And so after that point, I would either rent or borrow a trunk from a friend and go and, just take it on the plane. And it was the most stressful thing to do. Obviously,
It still
was
is.
just what it was. I eventually got used to it, and then when I joined Regina's band, I got my own trunk. I got this trunk that was the same trunk that Larry and Doug Weiss, Larry Grenadier and Doug Weiss and William Parker told me about. This trunk from Finland that was really small and lighter than the Gage trunk, and it was with the bass in it. It was underweight. It wasn't. It was below overweight. So if they would charge you, they would only charge you for oversized. And back then, that would be like $75. And then you've probably heard this story a million times, or you probably have experienced it. Did you ever travel with your bass without a removable neck?
Oh yeah, I don't have. Yeah, that's what I have.
Oh, okay. And you still travel with it?
Sometimes, not often. I mean, because it's just trashes you.
Yeah. I mean, but that's all. I mean, I did it for, I don't know, 15 years, 16 years. And so yeah, post 9/11, it's probably been told many times on your channel already.
Not yet. Let's see. Let's see.
Well, post 9/11, they would start opening your case, and sometimes they wouldn't be, you couldn't be there when they do it.
Oh yeah.
And one time I was there, and the TSA agent put all of her body weight on the top of the bass as she was like swabbing the inside, and you can't at that point.
Yeah.
So of course luckily it didn't completely wreck the bass, but I found out later there was a crack that had to be dealt with. But it got really trashed 3 times. One time the scroll broke off.
Oh.
One time this is all post 9/11. One time and then 2 times I had really bad cracks in the top. For me, it was, aside from having to deal with it on the road, the silver lining was that every time the bass would get fixed, it would sound better.
Yeah.
Because the bass, my bass I bought right before I went to college, and it had a major crack along the bass bar. It had a lot of problems. I never really liked the neck, so got a new neck when the neck broke. Got had the bass bar finally properly fixed, and every time I would do it, the bass would sound better and better.
Hey.
But then I think the last time I flew with my bass was 2008, 2009. And then and on that tour, I remember it was with Matt's band, and we got hit on the last flight. We got hit with so much money for my bass, and it was just like a flight on American Airlines or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't like an international flight or anything. And the other thing that I noticed was that when I would get to where I was going, the bass half the time wouldn't even sound that good. It would be all discombobulated from being in an
freezing airplane. Yeah.
So I just remember feeling like, well, if I'm going to make people pay now all this money, because and they lowered the overweight restrictions from 75 to 50 pounds, and they doubled all the fees.
Yeah.
I thought, well, let me just try doing bass de jour.
Yeah.
And once I did that, yeah, sure, it wasn't great. It wasn't ideal, but I felt like the quality of my life on the road improved about 1,000 times.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, even if someone's doing that for you, like say someone's carrying your bass and they set it up, but like you say, it's like, well, it's been through so much, Yeah. And then you get there and then you have to do the whole thing over again.
Right. I mean, I think I'm not saying I wouldn't ever try doing the removable neck thing down the road, but right now I'm not feeling the need to go that route, because from what I talk to friends of mine who do that, they're like, I say, well, do you have to pay for it? Like, oh yeah, you just get there early and you talk. I was like, no, I already did all that. I'm not. I don't want.
Yeah. And do they open it up? Oh yeah, they still open it up. Oh okay. Do they take it out? Yeah. Okay. And do they lock it? No. Yeah.
Oh, is that true?
Oh yeah. Yeah. They still take it out. Oh yeah, and they still open it up, and yeah. I remember seeing. Well, I remember sitting on the airplane, seeing them put my bass in, and like, there's 5 or 6 locks on it, and 3 of them were not locked, and I'm just like, oh man, that was probably the last time I did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It would always come back with like 5. Yeah. Like 3 or 4 locks would be okay.
Yeah.
The bass would be basically swinging around like a. Oh yeah, that was one time when I went to London. I was about to play Ronnie Scott's with Regina, and that's the bass came back like that, and then the neck had just come right out of the joint.
One time, actually, I would never do this with my own bass, but I taught in Ecuador for a year, and I didn't want to bring my own bass down, so I convinced them I would buy a bass for them to bring down, which they were ecstatic about, because to have so I just got like the hybrid Shen, and I was like, well, how am I going to bring it down there? So it was a styrofoam bass case. I don't know if you've seen those.
No.
So it has like maybe like 6 inches of styrofoam on the outside. It almost looks like a padded cello case, and it made it down there beautifully, because the thing is, like, if there's an impact, it just impacts the styrofoam.
Right.
I would never do this with my own bass. I'm saying that out for the record right now, but I was completely impressed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Check that out. I mean,
it'd be something that I would be comfortable just using as a regular case.
Right.
Yeah. Not for flying. I'm not promoting that.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some, luckily I have most of my experiences doing bass du jour been fine. There's been a couple, but there have definitely been a couple harrowing ones where you get there and the bass is completely unplayable. The one time I remember in Portugal when I was playing there, and luckily the person who was presenting the concert was also the head of the label whose records I had put out as a band, on which I'd put out records as a band leader. And I called him, and he immediately got a friend to bring a bass that was suitable. But this bass was basically like something they found in the back of a band orchestra, high school orchestra closet that probably hadn't been played in 25 years, and action like that, it just wasn't going to happen.
Well, you mentioned Doug Weiss. We were in Serbia, and he was playing with Peter Bernstein, and so he played before us, and it was one of those. But I'm always thinking like Ray Brown. This is my sound, so I that's my obligation. Like, I have to be able to do this. But it was a bass that was made out of like probably a ship, part of like a chair, maybe an instrument at some point. Wow. And Doug, and I don't care. Like, I don't bring strings on the road, but he put a G string on it, like maybe an olive or a Perazzi or something, and we were going on directly after him, and it was so funny. And then he took it off, like he took the time to like take it off and put the shitty one back on, but I didn't care. It was fun.
Yeah.
I was like, thanks,
Doug.
Yeah, thanks for going through all that trouble.
Wow. Meanwhile, one time I did a gig, and the strings they had on there were so terrible, and I happened to have a set of like Spire cores in my bag of tricks that I bring with me, and I decided, I said to the guys, like, look, these are old strings. I'll just leave them on there for you. And he was really, it was the guy from the backline company, and he was really annoyed. He was like, you put different strings on? I was like, yeah, because the old ones were really.
Yeah, I'm trying to help you out.
I said, you usually rent these to jazz bass players or guys who play in like whatever, like non-classical players, right? He said, yeah. These are the kind of strings they're going to want. He's like, all right.
Yeah.
So you can't win.
No.
Situations.
Anyway. Okay. Last thing, because thank you so much for all the time. I just want to hit your music a little bit. Big Mouth and Superette. I was just listening to Superette. Is that how, am I saying it right?
Yeah, I think so.
Superette.
Say it however you want. No, Superette.
Yeah. I love that too. Because I like how you described it too. I don't know who had described it, but it was like, yeah, it is kind of surf. Yeah, it is psychedelic. Yeah, I hear the West African thing in there. So what was that process for you like, and how did that come to be?
Superette or Big Mouth?
What's your favorite?
Okay, well, I don't have I don't make.
You love them all.
I do love them all. Well, my first thing was as a band leader was a quartet. Two tenor saxophones, bass, and drums, and that band was formed. I but like I was saying before, I was playing with all these different bands, and I loved all the experiences I was getting, but I was missing the kind of sense of consistency getting to play with one band. So I thought, well, I'll just put one band together. That'll be my band, and I'll write music for it, but that won't be the main thing. That it'll be a cool band that I put together, that it'll be unlike any other bands that I played in.
Yeah.
So the two tenor thing was the first thing that sort of came up when I was putting my first band together. And eventually, so I did two records with that, and the writing just kind of started becoming more of a thing, because I realized, oh, now I actually understand what I want to write, because I have this amazing band.
Yeah.
It was Tony Malaby and Bill McHenry and Gerald Cleaver on drums. And then it just became this very gratifying thing where I'd get together and play with them, and I was always looking forward to it, and I was always looking forward to hearing what they did with the music, and they would give me great feedback, and it was just this thing that I just started getting to do, and I was very lucky. And then eventually Craig Taborn joined the group, who I was playing. I did his record, his Light Made Lighter trio record, and I wanted to be able to keep playing with him, because he wasn't really booking any gigs as a band leader at the time. And
what year was this about?
That Craig started playing with us.
Yeah.
I did the Light Made Lighter record in 2001, and I started writing for him. Well, it was probably a couple of years after that, because the second Big Mouth record came out. The second quartet record, which was called Big Mouth, which is confusing, came out in 2003. And then I think 2004, later that year, he started doing gigs with us. And then eventually started calling the band Big Mouth. And then also Chris Cheek replaced Bill McHenry. So that became Big Mouth. That's the band that's still happening now. And so that's basically, it started as the quartet, and then eventually became this quintet. And for me, that band has sort of been my main home base in terms of having a vehicle for writing. Like everything kind of is filtered through that before I decide, well, is this something that I can do with those guys, or is this something for another project? And then at the same, about, I guess around the time that I put out the first Big Mouth record, which is called official Big Mouth record with Craig, which is called Deluxe. That's my third record. I had this idea that I want to do something similar with guitar that I was doing with tenor saxophones with an electric band.
Yeah.
And that's what Superette became. And with that, I missed getting to play. Well, I got to play with a lot of guitar players, but I wanted to play with like a guitar-based group with the sound of the guitar and write for it, and sort of just kind of live in that sound.
You're going back to your roots, the Police.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially like sort of when I got back into playing electric bass, that had a lot to do with it, because I started playing electric. I stopped playing electric completely pretty much when I moved to New York. I mean, when I did, I didn't feel comfortable doing it, so I basically quit. And then I got back into playing electric bass sort of in the late 90s, early 2000. Just kind of found my way back in, because I was hearing a different sound for the electric bass. It was different from what I was hearing around me at the time. And it was very much more of that sort of rootsy, back to this sort of old P bass, flat string, hollow body bass kind of sound. And that's the sound of the electric bass that I was hearing in context with the guitar thing. And so I talked to my friend Curtis Hasselberg, who plays in Superette, about it. And also I asked him if he wouldn't mind playing some of his music, because he's one of my favorite composers. He's also a great trombonist. And so we played some of his music.
That's not something you hear, like, oh, they're a great guitar player on great trombonist.
Yeah, he's a virtuoso trombonist who also plays guitar.
Okay.
Heavy trombonist. But he started on guitar before he played trombone, but he's kept it going this time. So he's a great guitar player, but his trombone playing is like his main thing. Like he would, so eventually I thought, well, what would be the least practical thing I could do? And that's to have Superette and Big Mouth play together. And that's what Super Big Mouth came out of. So
Naturally.
2 drummers, 2 guitars, 2 tenor saxophones, plus Craig and me.
Did you guys do a lot of touring or even like just concerts like with that configuration?
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've played a few gigs around New York, and I'm in the process of organizing. We're supposedly, assuming everything stays on lockdown, we're going to be playing at the Guimarães Festival in November in Portugal.
Oh, awesome.
Wonderful festival. I got to play a bunch of times with different people.
I did not know that's how it was pronounced.
Guimarães, it might not be.
Yeah.
But I don't. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not. So.
Well, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I was so enjoying listening to it because it was so layered in a way where you didn't really realize it, and I'm like, oh, there's a guitar now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, and there's another. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, well, there was writing for that was. I mean, it was challenging, but it was also a lot of fun. And I took a long time to figure out what what I wanted to do orchestrationally and arrangement wise, and I also wanted to make sure that the music was not going to just be like little pockets of solos for one person after another. I wanted to have like sort of like a long form kind of approach to everything, and also have the ability to be open at the same time.
Yeah.
Have a lot of like communal group interplaying like I have on my other bands. But the only band that I've really been able to actually tour with of my own has been Big Mouth. We've done that's the only band that's done actual European tours and festival gigs and some West Coast stuff. The other bands I haven't been able to do this.
Yeah, well, those are big undertakings.
Yeah, and it also just depends on scheduling and other circumstances and yeah, an 8-piece band is I think it's tough for anyone.
Yeah.
For someone like me, it's probably a little ambitious, but I'm excited to see if we actually can pull this off or not.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That'd be great.
Getting us all in one place in one time in the middle of Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, awesome, Chris. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was so great to meet you.
Thank you so much for taking the time. This has been really, really fun.
Yeah, and I always put links to your music and your projects. Love your website, by the way. It was very just fun to be on.
Oh, good. Thanks for checking it out.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah,
Hope
this was so cool.
This again sometime. Hope to get to meet you in person soon.
Yeah, likewise. I know. Hopefully, yeah. Usually, bass players meet on the road, so.
I know, like ships passing in the night.
Yeah, and if you can pull a Doug Weiss too, if you put the string on and then take it off. That's fine.
I'll leave it on.
Cool.
I don't usually bring strings on the road either, by the way.
Yeah, it is what it is. I remember one time I was somewhere with my group, and it was with a new piano player, and he was kind of green. And the G string broke. It's like always the G string that breaks, right? And so I was fine, and I'm like, we're just gonna change the key on this. And he was kind of freaking out, and I'm like, you gotta. This is it. This is real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Just gotta roll with it.
Yeah.
That's how they learn.
Yeah. Yeah. These whippersnappers.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much.
School them. All right.
Oh yeah, no. I'm nice right now. Yeah. No, that's how I learned. I learned on the bandstand.
Yep.
Yeah.
Trial by fire.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Chris. Super appreciate it. And yeah, excited to hear the Superette. What do you call it? Big Supermouth? No.
Super Big Mouth.
Super Big Mouth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Next time.